Look at this smile, big smile on his face. He's happy to be there. And you can't hear a frickin' thing. So everybody's happy to be there. The crowd's happy to be there. What up, everybody? My name's Fred. I'm a singer-songwriter living in New York, and I play music on the streets of New York to people I've never met before. So I love performing live, but I also love watching live performances and seeing what we can learn from other people in that regard. So today I'm going to bring you my thoughts on the Beatles, everybody's favorite band, live in Washington in 1964. And we're going to see what those four lads from Liverpool do that, maybe we can dive into a little bit from a theoretical perspective, or even just, see what their technique is and see what we can take away from something that was super duper popular at the time in the early to mid 60s. Let's check it out. We're dropping in right at the intro here. Um, little tuning, little making sure the sound is good. Everybody's dressed super well. That's good. Presentation. Presentation. All with a primal scream. Right off the bat, a couple of things that stand out. First off, that intro and this, the song "Roll Over Beethoven," classic late '50s, early '60s rock and roll. You'll hear that intro most famously with Chuck Berry, but also the Beach Boys, who I'm a huge personal fan of, made use of that type of intro. They're doing a couple of things, but most primarily, they're getting the crowd into it, and they're signaling this is rock and roll. 1964, I think that's still on the earlier end of the Beatles being in the United States. So still pretty fresh as far as a phenomenon. And they're saying, they're establishing pretty clearly the tradition that they're, that they're participating in the one regard. On the other regard, look at this smile, big smile on his face. He's happy to be there. And you can't hear a frickin' thing. So everybody's happy to be there. The crowd's happy to be there. But look at the presentation a little bit. So George up front singing a song, not usually who you'd expect. It would usually be Lennon or McCartney, the main songwriters. But really clear branding on the drum kit. That's one of the most common ways that bands will, make it really easy to understand who's up there. And then really tight presentation in terms of the haircuts all being the same. Something we've heard a bunch about is coming back with the whole Oasis scene. The mop tops, British mod style, showing that you're a part of the counterculture. Again, in the 50s and 60s, sort of the emergence of teen style for the first time, something that hadn't really been in existence prior to the pre-war days, pre-World War II. But once families were coming back, getting back together after the war, and things like the GI Bill, people started to have a little bit more money to spend. Along with that came the rise of being a teenager. This period before you were a fully formed adult, you're in teen in school, looking ahead to the future, and it was a real opportunity for you to define yourself against sort of the more stodgy, regimented culture that defined the Depression era, certainly in the 20s, but on into the 30s and the World War II era, that real uniformity. And so again, you've got them presenting themselves in a way. Of course, the music is a component, but in terms of the style, they're placing themselves at the forefront of this this new teenager group of consumers that really became the dominant taste-making group of that period of time. And it's really interesting nowadays when we see things like the Y2K revival, and a lot of the ways that style is presented in this day and age. It's an evolution from that original nascent conception of the teenager that this would have been still in the early days of. Roll Over Beethoven, a classic rock and roll song. I'm not exactly sure who wrote it, but again, this is a cover. This isn't necessarily a Beatles song. Though that doesn't matter. Look at how the crowd is going absolutely insane. So let's jump forward. Let's see. I saw her standing there. What a classic. Same setup. So still can't hear them. Ringo rocking out. Love that out of your drummer. Drummer's got to bring the energy always. The drum kit's shaking. I mean, the whole thing is shaking. Beautiful. Absolutely beautiful presentation. Absolutely beautiful crowd engagement. You don't need to sing into one mic, but it looks freaking cool. And it really drives home the connection that Lennon and McCartney had as songwriters, but also as singers in terms of the harmonies that they developed. And you know, the same way that when you're writing a song, you want a hook in terms of, you know, what is it that's going to leave the listener walking away singing your song to themselves, and what's going to be memorable. This type of connection on stage is a real way for these two to leave a visual hook of, you know, Paul and John singing together, you know, their harmonies, famous harmonies, in one of the most famous songs that they've ever written. A couple of things to pay attention to as well. The beat's really similar to Roll Over Beethoven. They haven't really gotten into their hyper experimental phases in the later parts of the 60s yet. Really, the musical styles are still pretty similar, but the slight deviations in subject material and, you know, and song format and things like that all were much more significant at that period of time than might be perceived now. When we look back at the Beatles and we think, oh, you know, what made the Beatles so transformative? One of the most important parts is that the culture that they emerged out of was very formulaic, and it was rather revolutionary to even take minor steps in any direction. And in that regard, the degree to which by the end of the 60s that the Beatles had strayed from that model, you know, even just black and white, the recordings that would have been at the end of this decade would have been in color. They would have dressed in color. Their haircuts would have been longer. The spirituality from, you know, India and other parts of the world, the very first baby steps towards that were being taken at this point in time. So a lot of times the Beatles can come across as a meme or something that, you know, oh, that was what my dad loved, and he ran it into the ground for me. And, you know, a lot of people are lucky enough to then take a beat and develop their own connection to the Beatles' music. And in fact, their music is so diverse that there really is sort of an entry point for almost anybody to, you know, to at least find something musically that they connect with in that regard. But as a model for the performing act, this is where the Beatles' impact really began. And you can hear it again with you can't hear the music over the crowd. And I think for a lot of, you know, songwriters, for a lot of performers who are just getting out there and nervous about how they might sound or how might they present themselves, if you can create a full package that makes sense, the pressure on each individual part of that is a little bit lower. So if you're not as confident in your singing voice, perhaps, if you are able to present yourself in a way that the singing voice is contextualized in the other decisions that you're making, that doesn't mean that you have to be flamboyant in terms of style to compensate for it, but it just means that all of the strategic decisions that you're making from a performing standpoint will make sense to the listener if they're coming from the same point in you, where you're clear on what your message is and what you're trying to have come across. So the Beatles, of course, very, very sound marketing brains, branding brains behind their decision making, and at the end of the day, that full package was just different enough from everything that had come before that it captured everybody's attention and gave the Beatles a foundation to grow into the rest of the decade and beyond. So anyway, that's our analysis here. If you made it this far, I really appreciate you listening. Hoping to do a lot more videos like this. So I'll see you next time. Peace.